way back a little bit.
That's fine.
Relax.
Relax.
Grab a cup of coffee. Good afternoon. My name is Briggs. I'm the Deputy Director for this federal working group. And thank you for being with us here today. I hope you found the morning program informative, and hopefully you'll find this panel informative as well. We know that good projects take a team, and we need to have a variety of perspectives and participants on projects, whether that's workers, communities, private sector, whether it's financial folks, or the actual project developers, asset owners. We also know that states and economic development officials can be incredibly important. So it really takes an ecosystem to come together. And here you're going to hear just a sampling of voices to hopefully inspire you about some of the roles that these various different organizations can play in a project, potentially for 48C opportunity, but also for other federally funded projects. And so with that, I'll do a brief round of introductions. Then we'll follow up with some conversation, and we'll open it up to you all in case you have questions or comments about these different perspectives. So first off, we have Kirstie McPherson with the Community and Economic Development Manager for the Colorado Office of Just Transition. Kirstie is the Community and Economic Development Manager. The office, OJT, was created in 2019 to assist workers and communities that will be adversely affected by the loss of jobs and revenues due to the closure of coal mines and coal-fired power plants. Kirstie is a behavioral economist and serial entrepreneur operating several businesses in the Yampa Valley. So welcome, Kirstie. And a big thank you to the Colorado Office of Just Transition, as well as the other state partners. As Brian said earlier in the day, they've been incredibly helpful for this event as well as in general. Next up, we have Tim Gibbs. Tim Gibbs is the newly named CEO of the Four Corners Economic Development, headquartered in Farmington, New Mexico. He's a veteran economic development leader, having served as president of the Ashland Alliance in Eastern Kentucky, as well as the executive director of the Craig and Moffett Counties Economic Development Partnership in Northern Colorado. So welcome, Tim. Thanks for being with us. Then we'll hear a worker perspective from Robert Gallegos. He is with the Boilermakers Local 101 and is the business manager for the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers Local 101 serving Colorado and Wyoming. The Boilermakers represent more than 50,000 skilled craftsmen and women and industrial workers. So thank you for being with us here today. And then finally, we have Mike Malley. He's the executive director of the Surplus Property Roundtable. The Surplus Property Roundtable, a not-for-profit organized to provide educational opportunities and resources to promote the responsible ownership, management, remediation, repurposing, and disposition of real estate with legacy environmental issues. Mike is a real estate, environmental, and risk management professional with over 30 years of professional experience. So Mike will be able to speak a little bit about how we can take assets and how we can potentially repurpose them for new opportunities. So thanks for being with us, Mike. So before we get into some follow-up questions for each of our panelists, I just wanted to maybe ground us in a little bit of what's actually happening. We've been talking about opportunity, but I wanted to talk about two projects just to give some tangible examples. One actually from Farmington, New Mexico is the San Juan Solar Project. This took a former coal power plant that was shut down within the last year. So having a big impact in terms of jobs and tax revenue. But since then, the D.E. Shaw Renewables company has actually taken advantage of the transmission capacity that was there from the former coal plant and is actually citing solar plus energy storage, creating opportunities for workers in the construction and operation phase, tax revenues, and other local community benefits. So this is real. That's an example of more of a clean energy deployment project. I also wanted to point to the Form Factory 1 in Weirton, West Virginia. So a former legacy steel site, especially after World War II, employed tens of thousands of workers in the steel industry. That brownfield has since been remediated. A variety of different players came together to make that happen. And ultimately, Form Energy, which is making long duration energy storage batteries, now has a factory they're building. They're populating that with employees, finishing building out the framework, and we'll be employing 750 people making really high wage jobs. Just some data on that, the competitive salaries would be $10,000 more than what men in the region make on average and double what women make on average in the region. So high quality jobs, really enabled by a variety of federal incentives, but also state and local players coming together to make that happen. So this is happening, and we want to tee up additional opportunities for how that can be enabled through 48C and other federal resources. So with that, I'd like to go to Kirstie first. Let me get my questions here. So Kirstie, first question, can you talk a little bit about the Colorado Office of Just Transition? In particular, how do you measure success in the work that you do?
Yeah, so the Colorado Office of Just Transition, we have been around for several years now. We're not new anymore. And so one of the big things, much like traditional economic development, it's really looking at jobs and tax base. And so all the questions always stem from it, and we just talked about this behind stage a little bit, is what happens to these communities once the power plants go away, coal mines go away. This is the largest tax producer in most of these communities. Within Moffett County, for example, it's about 47% of the total tax base ends up being the power plant and coal mines. And so a big part of what the office does and how to create a just transition is making sure that the community is stabilized when we make this transition entirely. So a big kind of component of what we're doing is making sure that we're tracking the tax base, we're tracking the job creation. And much like, again, economic development, this is the long game. So we won't see a lot of those numbers for 5, 10 years or more.
And what kind of federal and local investments are supporting worker transition in particular in this?
So our office is 50% worker and 50% community. So within the state, we have actually just hired our very first workforce navigator. She's in the audience. She's that lady right there, Jennifer Pirioni. So we have about 7 different things that we're going to be doing pre-closure, and then we have a whole post-closure as well. And so within the state, we are really working with between our office and then a whole variety of other offices to be able to what does that worker transition look like, while also making sure that we are not transitioning the workers too soon, because we would have 2 different groupings of workers that we'd be transitioning. A lot of the work that we've also already done is surveying the workers, identifying who wants to stay, who wants to leave, what they want to do. Do they want to get retrained? Are they starting new businesses? Are they moving to somewhere else, to a different state, different community? And around the board, it's about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So there's a lot of people that want to end up staying. And then how are we creating programs to be able to associate with what the workers want to do and how we're going to be able to sustain the community.
Great, thanks, Kirstie. Kirstie, you're off the hot seat for a minute, but I'm going to come back to you. So Tim, let's go to you next. Tim, congratulations on the new role, and you're a veteran in economic development work. What have you learned about successful development partnerships in energy communities, and how can that be applied, particularly in the Four Corners now in your new role?
Well, I think when you say veteran, that just means old, right? Yeah, I've worked in economic development across the nation in energy communities, and it does take partnerships. The best analogy that I can say is it would be so much easier if we just had the magic wand. We could just make it so. But at best, we're actually bringing the parts and pieces together for a collective whole. Energy communities, traditionally, energy communities are just the opportunity to bring the competitive advantages of economic geography. I remember the very first day that I was in graduate school, they put up the United States and started showing us areas, and each area had a forte. Well, if you're in the Midwest, it was agriculture. If you were in the South or if you were in the Northeast, it could be steel, whatever it may be. Well, these communities had the resources, the natural resources, and the extraction and the processing of them was how they were built on. So now we have to collaborate with take the whiteboard and kind of wipe it off a little bit and use the part pieces in new ways. So what I can see and what I do as far as economic development is we're always looking for a way that we can assemble the parts and pieces for our competitive advantages. We're looking for a way that we can either manufacture and use the parts of the pieces, or that we can use transmission lines, as you spoke about the project in San Juan County there. So identifying the opportunities, working with the private sector, trying to find ways that we can assemble those to have a true competitive advantage to get to the heart of what we do in economic development. That's who we are. And many times it's about bringing everyone to the table, whether it's a research institution, whether it's New Mexico Tech or whoever it may be, New Mexico State, and the private sector as well, to use the pieces and the parts we're learning about today, what the advantages of a community would be, and how the ADO, the economic development, can bring the conversation to the table.
So what does success look like? Like, how do you measure if you're doing a good job? What are the sort of the metrics and the things you're looking for?
That's a really interesting question, because depending on who you ask, you're going to get all different answers. Success is, we're not probably going to be what we were before. We're going to be different. There's going to be both good and bad to that. You spoke of wages, of above average wages for replacement industries. I don't know if I can say that. If you look at the wages for the coal mine, the power plant, you look at the development that's led for this community, that's a tough gig. And there is no one answer that I've ever heard. And if any one of you have one answer, I'd love to hear it. But there's 100 answers. And there's 100 things we have to do. And we have to do the best that we can do with the parts and pieces we have for the people. Economic development at its core is allowing people, the 1/3 that you're talking about, to live in a community of choice and ideally have the best life they can have for themselves and their family to come. Success is a tough gig. We're going to work towards that, and we are coming up with ideas that 20 years ago may have been blasphemy, but it's a reality of today. So how can we do this, and what can we assemble, and how can we be successful for at least the majority of the people in a way that will serve the community and serve those families? That's what each one of us are here today to learn about the assets that's being presented to us and how they can be assembled. I really would like to have a clear vision of what success is, but we're going to work towards it every day. And hopefully it will be defined and we will take advantage of what is here for tomorrow.
Well, thanks. And I hope you all are taking advantage of the opportunity to network with folks, and then that can lead to those conversations that could build out that vision moving forward. So thanks for those comments. Appreciate it. Robert, I want to go to you next. We know the trades are really important, both construction and operation, and apprenticeships are a really important role in terms of training workers for the future demand. Hopefully through these 48C tax credits, we're going to create some real strong demand pull. Can you talk a little bit about how organized labor and apprenticeships can play a role in filling that demand?
Yeah, so we do it's a 4-year apprenticeship program. Bring them in. It's all, sorry.
There you go.
We do a 4-year apprenticeship program. It's all on the job training. So from the time these kids step through the door, they do get paid. They get assigned to a journeyman on the job. They take them under their wing and they teach them the craft. So they are getting paid from the time they start. Nothing really comes out of their pocket. We recruit from Lieutenant Anthor over at Pikes Peak, starting to get veterans in. We work with Colorado Equity, which is trying to get female workers in. So trying to create jobs with good benefits, send people home safe, train them to be safe, and send them home with money.
I don't know if everyone is aware that traditionally fossil workers make a considerable wage with really good benefits. Can you just maybe comment a little bit on what typically, you work with the Boilermakers, what do they make in those kind of occupations?
So our total package is around $60 an hour. That includes your health insurance, your wage is around $40. We have other benefits. We have a separate annuity, we have pension, of course, and that's all paid into it. And the apprentices start out at 70%. So by the time they come in, they work in tiers every 6 months. It's a 4-year program, so around every 6 months they're getting raises. And
Pretty attractive.
yes, we have cards back there if you guys don't want to get what's done.
Give me one.
That sounds great. Let's go to Mike next. Mike, when Tim was talking, he was talking about economic development strategies based on the assets of a region, and building on assets is what your organization is all about. So can you just tell us a little bit more about Surplus Property Roundtable and sort of what are the goals for your organization and your member companies?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Briggs. So the Surplus Property Roundtable is a nonprofit organization comprised of 22 Fortune 500 companies. Names that all of you in this room would recognize: the big four oil companies, BASF, Boeing, BNSF, the list goes on. The organization was formed approximately 11 years ago for the primary purpose of getting corporate executives to meet and benchmark on the management of surplus properties that are in their portfolios. And by surplus properties, I'm going to define them for you. Surplus properties are typically obsolete, non-performing real estate assets, many of which have environmental impairment or some other impairment associated with those properties. They're no longer functioning, they no longer have contributed beneficially to these organizations. And the 22 companies that comprise the organization have thousands of sites across the U.S., millions of acres of surplus properties that are being underutilized. Many of those assets sit within the target areas of the 48C program and the Energy Community programs. And our members, our companies are fully behind the transition of these properties to a higher and better use. As they currently sit, they are a financial burden to their balance sheet. There's costs associated with holding these assets, with sustainability being so important today to investors that invest in these types of companies. The repurposing of these surplus assets is critically important as a goal for all of these companies that belong to the SMR, but also Fortune 500 companies and other public companies in general. So the organization is really about promoting the sustainable management, reuse, disposition of these properties. And with the 48C tax credit, what we're finding is that this is an impetus for investment in tertiary and rural communities where a lot of these surplus assets sit. And we're now seeing investment interest in these assets because this incentive provides the economic boost that brings the returns that are necessary to repurpose these sites.
Well, that's exciting, and we want to see legacy coal mines, legacy coal plants as assets, and hopefully those can be sites for future jobs and future tax revenue. So
yeah,
appreciate it.
The other thing I was going to say is a lot of these surplus assets are former coal mines, are former refineries, chemical plants, automobile manufacturing plants. The one thing that they all have in common is infrastructure. And infrastructure includes utilities, access to power, water rights, permits in place that make them very attractive to reinvestment because the infrastructure and the permitting and all of the necessary operating, the operating environment is necessary to repurpose these sites. So we're encouraging the advanced manufacturers to take a look at these assets because there's great interest in them because of the attributes that they have and the ability to take advantage of in-place infrastructure permits and other things that make these assets valuable to the new economy.
Great. Well, one thing that's critical to all of this is making sure that communities are at the table. And Mike, as you work with these big companies, can you talk a little bit about that interaction between the communities that are adjacent to these properties and maybe some best practices or just things that people should be aware of?
Yeah, so these companies that have surplus assets in these communities are critically aware of their reputation, because at one time they were the employment center of those communities. Whether it was a coal mine, whether it was a manufacturing plant, thousands of jobs were attributed to those operating plants and assets. These companies care that those assets are no longer working to produce jobs, no longer working to produce tax rateables. And they're very interested and very compelled to want to work with the communities to make sure they put them back into productive use. With the new sustainability and ESG goals that these companies have, it's really important for them to take these initiatives to work with the communities to put these assets back into productive use, create the jobs, create the tax rateables, eliminate the blight, improve public health. And it is a continuing metric that these companies are judged by and they live by, and know that they are concerned about these communities and want to work with these communities to make sure that these valuable assets that 10, 15 years ago weren't considered valuable are put back into productive use.
Thanks, Mike. Kirstie, I'm coming back to you if you're ready. Let's talk a little bit about communities. So communities generally lack the capacity to engage in this kind of work. Particularly, we hear that the federal government is too complicated. Some are overwhelmed by the transition. You know, they hear about a pending closure. They don't know where to start. So can you just talk a little bit about your experience through the lens of being at the Colorado Office of Just Transition, sort of what you're hearing from communities, as well as maybe some best practices or tips for success and that kind of thing?
So I think we're in a pretty interesting spot just in history right now, just in general. There's so many different assets. There's so many different things that are going on, the federal government, the state government. All the resources that we're able to produce and provide for these communities that are transitioning ends up being a lot for the one economic developer that usually exists in these transitioning communities. And I think that there's a big component of what we're all trying to do within the state and federal government is being kind of that one-stop shop. I think the IWG has done a really great job of trying to make that happen. I know that OJT is really conscious and aware of those different things. We have, from a state side, we work really hard to try to work together on the state component. So we do a monthly state call in which we all are talking about all the different communities. We're sharing projects, we're sharing different things that are going on. And that way it reduces the need for the communities to tell us each individually, which I think is a pretty big best practice. We also are actively working on a variety of different resources from the state side, such as our grant writer program. So OJT does have a piloted grant writing program that we have just launched. And so if there's information or anything that we can share on that, I'm not happy to do so, but Terry in the back is. And and so I think it's looking at like our job, especially through the state and federal government, is looking at the holes of what is happening and how to be able to provide and produce assets for them to be able to do their job better, and to make the job easier, not more complicated.
Right.
And then when we're designing programs such as grants and a variety of other things like that, I was on the economic development side, so trying to figure out how to navigate those grant components. How do you make it easy? How do you make it like kind of a one-stop type of thing? Like that is what we have to consciously as a state and federal government do every single day to be able to make it easier for these communities to be able to navigate through, especially considering how they don't have a team of 50 people doing it.
And did you have something to add there?
No, I actually love our answer up here. I mean, it's just transition and what they're doing is incredibly important. Because there are so many holes. I mean, you know, we're the government, we're here to help. I mean, there is of course truth to that, but navigating that, just what we heard today when we were hearing the panelists talk about what they could say, what they couldn't say, why they couldn't say it, read between the lines, and we're practitioners. So when we go back and we're talking to a city council or our county commissioner about the opportunities and how we can help the business community, we have to be at our best and we have to have these services. We have to have these people we can refer to help them navigate, to apply. So I think it's spot on, and I think it's incredibly valuable for us to have a network or our own kitchen cabinet of people that can help us through this process. Because this is unprecedented times. It's unprecedented for the amount of federal stimuli that's out there that communities can tap into, but also the transitional economy that we're all facing as well of opportunity and threats.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Tim. Robert, I want to talk a little bit about workers. In a sense, they're busy. They've got a job, and then, you know, in some cases, they're getting laid off. They're having to transition from one job to the next, or maybe they're interested in going after the next, you know, job because a new industry is being developed. Can you just talk a little bit about, like, how do your organization make sure that workers have the information and the training opportunities they need, whether it's coming from out of, you know, one sector or moving into the next?
So the energy sector is ever changing, as you know. We do update our standards for our apprenticeship program. Like every 2 years, we'll rewrite them. Right now, we're putting a lot of work into them, hydrogen, that. We try to keep the apprenticeship updated as possible. But that's also hard when we don't know exactly what's coming next. So we do try to work all that in there. The other thing we have, it's called the MESC program. Through that, we do updated training. And we do classes like Ocean 30. We do regular update classes. And just try to keep them updated as possible.
Gotcha. Tim, I wanted to come back to you on New Mexico. What do you see as sort of the industries, either in the near future or maybe the further out future, coming to your part of the Four Corners?
I'd like to set the stage for where we are right now, just very briefly. 52.5% of all the income that comes to the state of New Mexico is from gas and oil right now. So over 52% from extraction industries right now. $950,000 an hour is contributed to the state economy from those two industries right now. So, which put that as a benchmark of where we're starting now. Certainly there are competitive advantages of the infrastructure that's in place that you referenced earlier about power transmission lines and such of that. There is an abundance of sun as well that makes things like solar an attractive industry that pencils in New Mexico as well. People in place as well. There are other things that will be coming. But some of these communities are remote. Farmington's not on an interstate highway system. There's a 4-lane highway, but it's not on an interstate highway system. We have a lot of partners. There's a sovereign nation state, the Navajo nation state as well. That is a wonderful asset to have, but it adds complexities as well. Everyone working together towards common causes. So we're training our people for the industries of today. We're exploring new ways to use the assets that we have in the area to attract and recruit. That is a different mindset. There's an entrepreneurial mindset that's developing as well. Many of these communities, whether it's a steel community that had 7,500, like my past, where I was back in Kentucky, when you have those type of industries, you don't develop an entrepreneurial mindset. Now we are trying to reinvent ourselves with more of an entrepreneurial mindset to identify new opportunities and new things that we can do. Those things take time. You don't just start off to you may try to a displaced worker, but you're probably starting off in elementary school, middle school, and high school, talking about economies, talking about entrepreneurship, talking about how to be successful. The thing we can't teach is the burning in the belly. We can teach you skills how to be successful. So I think there's a all the above strategy towards this. My first answer was, if anyone knows the one answer, I would love to apply and hear that. But that's not the case. So we're going to do a lot of different things. We're going to remove the barriers. We're going to increase our broadband participation. We're going to make certain that our connectivity to the world is better. We're investing in our infrastructure for we have better communication or better transportation systems. We're working on a short line railway to connect to the main line that runs parallel to like the I-40 community for better connectivity to the world. Because there are many reasons to be in the region, many reasons to want to raise your family. So whether you create your job or whether it's one of these new things that we can help facilitate and bring all the parts and pieces to the table, that's our role. So it's yet to be determined on that, but it will be all about strategy, using the assets we have, the people and the place.
Gotcha. Well, Mike, you mentioned sort of some generic ways that these member companies do things. Can you just double click on that for a second? Maybe give us a specific example or two?
Of how these companies work with the communities?
Well, I was thinking in particular, reusing some of these sites.
Yeah, so I want to make it clear that the companies that are part of the surplus property roundtable generally do not redevelop these sites themselves. They no longer have a core use or purpose for the business they're in, whether it's producing oil and gas, transporting rail. So they're not interested in redeveloping because that's not their core business. What we do is work with end users and investors who are willing to look at an asset for all of its faults and attributes and decide what the highest and best use of that property is. And so working carefully with end users, investors, we're able to connect in a way that facilitates not only title transfer, but the transfer of environmental liabilities and other value impairment liabilities that go along with the transfer of the title. So there's insurance products that we use, there's indemnities, contract language, all of which is part of the best practices of transferring these blighted properties to an end user who's then going to convert it for a higher and better use. It's a very complicated process. There's numerous best management practices that we work on. Our companies respect and want to work with developers and end users who want to invest in these properties. It has a double effect in that for the liabilities are a hit to the balance sheet of these companies. And when they transfer those properties and those liabilities, that effectively cleans up the balance sheet. So there's a drive to reposition these properties, not only from a financial perspective, but also because of the ESG and sustainability goals that investors are putting into these publicly held companies.
I was inspired to learn through interactions with your organization, as well as the EPA Brownfields program, for example, that there's actually a whole industry of folks that are working in this intermediary space, if you will, between the legacy assets and then the future tenants or owners of the new use of the site. And so if you're dealing with an asset owner that maybe doesn't know what to do with the legacy facility, for example, encourage them to reach out. There are entities out there that this is what they do. They make the connections between the financial sector and other folks that actually pull together these deals, because it is quite complicated and can seem like a barrier. Likewise, if you're a private sector organization looking for your next site to locate a manufacturing facility, know that don't look past brownfields and say, well, there's the environmental legacy, it's complicated, I'm just going to go to a green field, it's easier to do. Know that there are organizations out there that are willing to take on some of that complexity for you, and that can hopefully create a better financial deal, as well as put some of those sites back into use that historically, have employed workers and communities and are ready for that next investment. So speaking of that, Kirstie, I wanted to go to you next. For those that maybe are thinking about locating their next facility or otherwise making an investment in a coal community, what should they know about how to engage with communities?
I think all of these communities have some pretty amazing and remarkable economic development managers and city managers, county managers, and trying to figure out the best entry point to these communities. I also think that these communities are very willing to have conversations. No one is going to just shut a door instantaneously, right? And so it's trying to figure out what best thing works with the communities. As Tim mentioned, infrastructure. I think the part that we overlook quite a bit is these coal communities, these energy communities were set up to be energy communities. They have the infrastructure to be an energy community. They also have sometimes some water rights, they have access to rail, they have access to distributional logistics, again, for energy communities. And so it's trying to figure out how a private industry can work a little bit more with the public side and vice versa. There's kind of always that key there that I think is a little bit harder. Those are some difficult conversations every once in a while. And then the other part that I think is really interesting is we don't necessarily make navigating the tax credits and some of these different things easy for the private sector. So I think our job is really to work with the communities on figuring out how to do capital stacks, how to be able to figure out all the different tax incentives, how to talk about those things, educate those different components, and be able to work with the communities on how they can best use that and be their own site selectors for their community. I think sometimes we overlook the fact that economic developers are sometimes playing the role of site selectors as well. And how do we help give them the advantage and stand up to be able to do some of those different things. There's so much information out there, and there's so many things to navigate around, that I think a big part of what it is that we're trying to do is the communities have to tell us who they want to attract and what they want to do. And then we can kind of go in and help figure out what are the best incentives, what are the best different ways to be able to attract some of these different components. And how do you leverage all the different resources that are available to bring in those communities?
That's great. Go ahead, Tim.
One thing I want to add today too is the people themselves that worked in these industries. If you profile what it takes to be a coal miner, if you profile someone what it takes to work in one of these power plants, these are great workers. And if you talk to any site consultant across the country right now, it's about people and skills. And people and skills that want to be in place. They want to be where they are, in fact. And when you do profile those jobs, you find out that they have a high degree of functionality in electronics or pneumatics, or they're used to shift work, or they're used to working in teams, and they're used to working in a safe environment. These are core foundational pieces that can be applied to other industries as well. Because if you talk to most employees, or most employers, they're looking for people they can employ. They're willing to train them up a little bit to do some of the things on the job, but they want them to have those foundational skills. And there's another part of this that's even maybe a little harder to find, but just as important as well. In many ways, this is what this country is about. I mean, this is a blue collar. This is someone that wants to provide for their family, wants to have a good job, and wants to retire from that job. They're not looking to go across the street for 50 cents more on the hour. They're looking for something that's a career. And when we quantify what these workers bring to the table, and then we apply it towards any economy, new economy or a transitional economy may be, I think we underestimate the value of the workers themselves. What do they bring to the table, and the marketability of those for economic development practitioners such as myself.
Thanks, Tim. So at this point, I'd like to send the same question down the road for all four. Robert, I'm going to come to you next. And the question is really, what can your organization type bring to somebody that's considering putting together a 48C eligible project? So Robert, in your case, what can workers and obviously organized labor bring to a project team that might be considering applying for one of these tax credits?
I think most importantly, bring a skilled workforce, trained to complete the job safely, done on time.
All right. Mike, let's go to you next. You work with asset owners as well as a lot of other folks that are really important in this ecosystem. What can they bring to the table for a project team?
Yeah, I would say that the investment in these communities starts with valuing the assets that they're ready to transition to a higher and better use. Investment in these types of projects can be significant. I'll give you an example of one of our members at a petrochemical plant in Northern California. It's been closed for 15 years, boarded up, shuttered, no use, no jobs, no tax ratables. The site was sold roughly 3 years ago. It resulted in a $185 million capital investment into the community. It created 3,000 direct, indirect, and induced jobs. With an annual compensation of an aggregate total of $190 million, so roughly $66 million per job. It inspired and created $475 million in economic growth to that community. So the repositioning of these assets is critical to the communities. It creates the jobs, the tax ratables, and it takes a blighted asset from non-productive to one that produces jobs and all the things that we're looking for in these communities where these blighted assets have resided.
That's great. Thank you. Kirstie, what about a state perspective? I know you can't necessarily speak for your colleagues across all of the offices from the state of Colorado, but can you talk a little bit about what can a state bring to a project team that might be considering a project like this?
I think, again, it's kind of what I talked about a little bit. It's bringing together all those resources to be able to figure out the different things. I think the big component is not ever just one tax credit. It's trying to figure out what the full capital stack looks like, and how to bring a whole bunch of different resources together to be able to make it a good investment for the community as well as for the industry that's trying to come in. And then it's trying to figure out which tax credits play the best with others. My friends over at OEDIT, is it a rural jumpstart program that we could also end up bringing in? Is it being able to work with the communities to be able to create a financial incentive package? Is it an infrastructure grant and loan? What are some of the different things that can kind of fit the community standing up this tax credit, trying to attract these things? How can they be more competitive within the space?
Putting it all together.
Yep.
Thanks. And Tim, can you provide the perspective from the regional economic development entity? What can your entity type bring to bear on this?
Well, the first thing I would like to mention is awareness. I don't think people stay up at night reading about the congressional record, about what was passed, what the application would be, and what the group is under the group that may have something that may build out business and industry. So a regional economic developer will build awareness of his community. Will also work within the business community to understand the opportunities that may exist within it and help them take advantage of it. We have about 100 members. The Chamber of Commerce has about 600 members, but we're before City Council, we're before the county commissioners, we're before these groups. I'm going before every civic club there is in the next 3 months, it seems like, because I'm the new guy, talking about economic development in the Four Corners, in particular in San Juan County, and in Farmington and the other municipalities. So having an awareness, having communication with your partners, reaching out to the business community, that's our forte. Now, we can work with our just transition folks. We can work with the EDA. We can connect people. So we need more than enough to be dangerous. But then we also have to make the connection so they can understand whether it's practical enough to help them in any way. So we're kind of a mouthpiece, so to speak. But that's what we've been doing for a really long time, is serving the needs of business and industry in our community. This is just another tool that we can apply for them to see whether it helped them with their existing or something new.
Thanks. So with that, I just sort of like to summarize here that, there's a lot of different players that can come together to form a project team. They can strengthen it in a variety of ways, from bringing assets to subject matter expertise about repurposing that site. We heard about the opportunity to leverage workers and worker organizations. They can be incredibly important, and particularly for 48C, as was discovered earlier, communities and workers will need to benefit. That'll be a scored merit review criteria, so that's incredibly important. We heard about the opportunity to work with regional and state entities. They can be those connectors. I'll point out that entities like these are frequently very familiar with both state and federal incentives, and so that can also be a resource to you, not unlike our federal IWG Navigator and Clearinghouse resources. So with that, I want to thank the panelists. Could you please join me in giving them a hand? And we're going to go ahead and transition into the next closing session.